Hey, thanks for joining me tonight. My name is Anthony Horvath. I'm the host of the Gutencast, and I will be talking into the silence today. I don't have a guest joining me, so if there's any problems with the audio or whatnot, someone's going to have to let me know. Um, Although I don't expect there to be any. In fact, I just did my little sound check. I'll just set that aside over here. So the Gutencast is a podcast program featuring and promoting the books that we publish through the gutenbookpress.com website. All of our books are also available on Amazon. If you want to buy just one copy, buy it on Amazon. If you want to buy 100 copies of a book that we publish, buy it through Gutenbook Press. We'll cut you a deal. Reach out to me. We can make that happen. So tonight we're going to cover an awful lot of territory. Some of it, probably all of it, controversial, which is fine by me. I am no stranger to controversy, even if it's just in my own mind and my own universe. So I do have like links and things ready to go, hopefully to keep me on track, sort of. And I'm already getting angry texts. Why? Okay. All right. It's not an angry text. It was just a distracting one. So on the screen there, you see Mr. I Am the Science, Tony Fauci. And if you think this podcast is going to be about him, no, not exactly. It's going to be him. Really, it's about that sentiment. These two ideas together, really, and he just is the perfect embodiment. We heard all during COVID, trust the science, trust the science, trust the science. And then Fauci would go on TV and basically claim to speak for all of science. Like there could not possibly be any deviation or variation from his proposals while still also being scientific. In the actual quote, he says, I represent the science. The I am the science is something that, has taken on a life of its own. Um, I'm sure he doesn't appreciate it, but, it is the attitude that he expressed. So, what I want to do tonight is I want to talk about, in a way, debrief or maybe even deprogram some flawed notions about what science is or what it ought to be, what it isn't, and compare that to recent developments within the last 8 years. But we'll go even further back than that in some cases, because this is a serious topic, and I think it's been made clear just how serious it is by virtue of the fact that right around February of 2020, a bunch of people started running around saying that they represented science and everyone has to do what they say. So at that moment, any chance to reconsider or reevaluate or think through what constitutes science, what kind of sway it should have on public policy, uh, or in what form how it should be controlled and channeled. Like who makes the call? Do the politicians make the call, or do the technocrats make the call? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said technocrats. And maybe tip my hand a little bit. Or do the scientists make the call? The unelected scientists. That moment came, and it was too late to have the conversation. The urgency of the moment was upon us, and I think we paid dearly for not coming to terms with some of these issues earlier than that. Although there were lots of reasons before that to do so, and I used to have a blog. Strictly speaking, it does still exist, although I've had to hide most of my content because crazy people have turned violent, and that's just the reality. And I feel like I need to protect my family from the crazy people, and it would be useful if I didn't have to worry about someone reading something that I wrote on the line 15 years ago and deciding to hunt me down. I know it's self-censorship is just weird. And maybe I'm overreacting, but I think recent history suggests perhaps not. At any rate, um, on that blog, I had been talking and warning about these issues for a long time with my audience of at most 250, 300 readers. It's not a lot of reach. And it is what it is. But I think I'm really saying that not to portray myself as a prophet or a seer. Well, I could sport a long beard and I could make it work. Sit at the gates and scratch myself with pottery shards. I could do that. But really, just as an illustration of, the signs are all there for anyone who wanted to look at them. You didn't have to even look that hard to see these trajectories. So that, to put it in perspective, in February of 2020, before others were taking preparations or even really talking about like a national shutdown, in me and my household, I started making preparations for a national shutdown um, right around January 22nd, 23rd. And I actually still have the receipt for some of the materials that I bought because I knew the kind of people we were dealing with, the way that they thought, the way they behaved. I knew that like the old Men in Black statement, an individual is smart, but people are dumb. I knew there was a lot of that. I knew that when people are afraid, they can be pushed to do things that people, being the operative phrase here, not individuals, to do things they would not normally consider. And so I was not surprised in the slightest. And ironically, interestingly, no, there's irony too. My radar really went off. Um, I believe it was January 10th. Someone can maybe check the date on that later. When the World Health Organization issued a statement via Twitter saying that China had assured them that there was no person-to-person spread of the new novel coronavirus. And, a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief. And I was like, well, that's it. Nope, this is the real deal. We've got ourselves a pandemic coming. We're going to believe China? I mean, are you kidding me? China? Right? And so just the lack of critical thinking that's out there just blows my mind sometimes. Um, so the irony there, that part of it is that I was always most concerned about COVID when I believed that there was good reason that it had been imparted somehow through a Chinese bioweapons lab. But they bent, like Fauci, just bent over themselves to say, no, 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 it was a wet market. There was no malevolent or accidental release from the wet labs or wet markets. And it's like, well, then, gee, it's just kind of an ordinary new novel coronavirus. And we've had, at that point, there had been at least a half dozen, if not more. Um, it's not like there haven't been coronaviruses in the world before that. But while I thought it could be a bioweapon, I was on high alert. And not to, go too far into that rabbit hole. I think the evidence is perfectly plausible that that's probably exactly what it was. And if you want to dig into Fauci, it would seem that there's a paper trail that ties him perhaps to some of the money that funded that research there at the Wuhan laboratory. But like I said, this is not about Fauci. It's about this idea of what science is, whether or not we should just trust the science as if science is our new God and the scientists are the new priests, which is indeed much the way it has morphed It's the new church. They even have their own sacraments, their own rituals, and it's about as almost as dangerous to cross the new church as it was the old church of medieval times, according to lore. Um, a Galileo of today would be mercilessly flogged just as easily by the likes of Fauci and whatnot. But I digress, I think. Before I go further, I want to talk about. I want to share a personal story, one that some of my viewers will know, and I did talk about it on a previous podcast, and I have a feeling that I will, excuse me, on other broadcasts to come, because it was a turning point in my life. Now I've always been, I don't know, a rabble rouser of sorts, but prior to about 2007, I wasn't really aware of any of the arguments that are out there about nutrition or vaccines or trying to think of some examples. Fluoride that's already come up. If the government suggested that I put a chemical in my body, I basically just did it without even thinking. Um, you know, there was warnings already. I recall about MSG. But MSG was like a number one ingredient in ramen, if I remember correctly. And I loved ramen, and I wasn't going to be talked out of it. So something happened right around 2006. And it's worth sharing this story to put this whole episode in context from a personal level. So in 2006, my daughter was diagnosed in the womb with a birth defect, spina bifida in particular. And spina bifida, there is no known definitive cause like that we know of. We know that there's some associations, like if you have folic acid, you're gonna have a less chance of having a child with spina bifida, so on and so forth. Folic acid being water soluble is not the kind of thing they ever thought about adding to community water supplies, interestingly. But I digress. Anyway, so basically, well, I'll just talk about my daughter's case. There was basically a lesion, in the lower part of the spine. The nerve center in that area was more or less severed, as we would later come to find out. So she has very little movement below the waist, very little sensation below the waist, and something that happens with many spina bifida kids, and something that we were informed of immediately, was that you can have something called hydrocephalus develop, because what happens is Chiari-2 malformation. The our cerebral spinal fluid escapes down the back of our spinal cord under normal circumstances. So your brain, your skull, is constantly creating these cerebral spinal fluids, and then disposing it as it gets old. But in many cases with spina bifida, um, the release valve gets shut off because the spine, it gets sucked down, pulls down towards where that lesion is or that gap. And when it comes down, it shuts that valve, and then you have the hydrocephalus, where the cerebral spinal fluid, fills up into the skull, compresses the brain, um, potentially does all sorts of damage, especially in the long term. So we knew very early on that we were going to have a shunt installed in her skull that rerouted the cerebral spinal fluid out of the skull, and it's the way her shunt works. It dumps it into her stomach where it's neutralized there. I'm leaving out all sorts of interesting things. At any rate, as luck would have it, our pediatric neurosurgeon, whom we had lined all this up with, everything was all established. He, my daughter came early by, I think, 3 weeks, and he was on vacation. So that was a problem, right? We didn't discover, well, I guess I don't know exactly when I discovered it. Things happened very, very fast that day. Maybe we didn't find out until we actually got to the hospital. At any rate, we got to the hospital. They had to do a C-section. That was all planned. And then somewhere along the lines, like the news came out that our neurosurgeon who was going to do this shunt operation was unavailable. And the best option that they were aware of was to fly her out to a hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, in a helicopter. And my daughter has done many things that I have not, and riding in a helicopter is one of them. But I watched her take off. She was in her mother's arms for less than 5 minutes. The mother was left in the hospital. Excuse me just for 1 minute here. I'm going to actually mute myself. I thought that was my wife correcting me, but no. She forgot I was doing the podcast. So my daughter was airlifted to Madison, and the wife was left behind. This all happened late afternoon, and it came to me to drive from the La Crosse area to Madison the following morning on my own. Obviously, very, very frightened and concerned about everything. Because, this is all life-threatening stuff, really. And, if you've ever, as a parent, I'm sure that a lot of my viewers will have, many of you will have had experiences that are crisis moments like this, where things are completely out of your control, and the fate of your loved one is completely in the hands of another. And in this case, it was life or death. So I'm driving to Madison early the next morning. And this is 2007-ish. Cell phone towers are still not great. But I did have a cell phone, but I was in an area where there was a poor cell signal. And all of a sudden, I get a call from the hospital, and they put me through to the pediatric neurosurgeon who's going to be working on the shunt. And he says, "So I need your approval to do this procedure." I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I thought we all had this lined up. And he said, "Well, the guy over in La Crosse, he does it a different way. I want to do it. I want to do this new experimental thing with your daughter." Now, if anyone knows me at all, when it's anything of any kind of importance whatsoever, I will research the hell out of it. But while you're driving 65 miles an hour down the road, and you've got 2007 era internet connections, and I don't think I had a smartphone. I don't think it was a smartphone. And your doctor says, "I want to do this experimental procedure," and it's like, there's no chance really to research it at all. And of course, the previous neurosurgeon had never mentioned it, which is actually a complaint, because to hear this new pediatrician talk, this new procedure was the cat's meow. Like, if this worked, then a lot of her shunt problems would just no longer exist. And by that time we knew what kind of problems a shunt could pose on in the long term. So I'm like, I mean, can't this just wait until I get there and you can talk about it? She said, nope, she's on the table now. We're ready to do the procedure right now. She's already been anesthetized and everything. Well, hell's bells. Good grief. So there's only one thing that I could think to say in that moment, which was okay, if it was your kid, what would you do? And he said, I would attempt the procedure. It was literally all I said, okay, all right, go for it, I guess. Come to find out that the number one potential side effect of this experimental procedure is death. Like, there's the normal stuff, like any surgery where you're under anesthesia, there's a chance of death, right? That's always there. No, this was like catastrophic, right? That's how like sensitive this procedure was. He failed to mention this to me while we were on the phone and my daughter was on the table. Excuse me while I take a drink. Long story short, he did not actually do the procedure. He actually did the shunt more or less the way the first neurosurgeon had said. The first neurosurgeon had never said anything about the great potential of this procedure, which would have been nice to at least note about it, to consider it, to reject it maybe, or whatnot. So fast forward, I don't know, 6 months or so. We're back there with the new neurosurgeon for review or something. And I don't really remember what the question was, but by this point, if you can imagine who I was before and now imagine this experience, whatever it was, I was like, you're going to have to explain this more. You're going to have to give me more data. I need you to give me some research papers that talk about it. And he just sort of like smiled in this sort of like condescending sort of way. And if he could have put his hand out on my shoulder and patted it, he would have. He said, and I'm, maybe I'm not exaggerating it too much, but it was like, well, see, this really is brain surgery. And, this is my domain, and you're just going to have to trust me. Well, this is where I learned the value of the 3 letters GFY. Because that's pretty much how I felt at that moment. See, that's never going to happen ever again in my life. Like, it'll like, this is where I'm going with this. Because of this experience, maybe I'll just distill it down. So I had 2 competing pediatric neurosurgeons who had 2 competing, completely contradictory ideas on which procedure we should do. Both of them are brain surgeons. They disagree with each other. But it's my kid. I have to choose. So how do you choose, if you're not a brain surgeon, between brain surgeon A, who says XYZ, and brain surgeon B, who says LMNOP? I guess you're just SOL, right? And of course, these guys, if something had gone wrong or gone bad, they would have never have known about my daughter, her fate. If she would have died, from a complication or whatever, the chances that they would ever have even been informed are like slim to none. They don't live with their mistakes. I do. So you will never, ever be able to say to me, oh, well, I have a PhD in this, so you should listen to me. Or I'm a public health director with 40 years of experience. You should do what I say. Or I'm a nurse who's been doing this for 40 years. You should do what I say. Or I don't care what you say. You can say whatever you want. You will never be able to shame me or intimidate me or yell at me or scare me or do anything ever again without my consent and the fullest extent of my ability to research that. And I don't care what you call me, because I have to live with consequences. Those people do not. And the other side of it is, and the neurosurgeon example, it really illustrates it well, I think. You can always find an expert who disagrees with some other expert, right? So it doesn't matter how. Pick a topic. Pick the most controversial topic that you want. You can always find the experts who will agree or disagree or contradict or whatever. Every position is covered by some expert somewhere, which means that if you're just the dude who has to make the decisions for your family or in your own life, no matter what, you're going to have to sort through various truth claims and come up with something, or you can just float around on a sea, crashing waves, sending you side to side without a care in the world, until all of a sudden something like COVID comes and they're telling you got to do this, this, and this. And I mean, I guess you'll just do it if you're that kind of guy. But as for me, never going to happen. So as you watch this, and perhaps you hear a little bit of an edge of skepticism on some of this stuff that, you think, well, I've got 4 terminal degrees. I'm going to tell him what's what in the comments or whatever. If your argument is you should believe me because I have 4 terminal degrees, GFY. You need a better argument. You're going to have to bring it, baby. That's just all there is to it. You can try that stuff on somebody else. It ain't going to get anywhere with me. Either persuade me with a good argument, with good reasons, with evidence, preferably, or you can take a hike. I really don't care. So let's talk now. I bet you none of you watching right now thought we were going to do that. Sorry, I'm heavy on. No, not heavy on the rum yet. Rum is the drink of choice tonight, in case you're wondering. So what is science? So I have a very old-fashioned idea of science, and tell me if you've heard this before. I believe that science begins with an observation. You see something in the world, it piques your curiosity or whatnot, and you want it to explain it somehow. So you develop a hypothesis. What could explain this observation? Then you design an experiment, an actual physical apparatus of some kind, or procedure. Maybe apparatus isn't the right word. Procedure to test the hypothesis, and you go through. You try to make sure that you eliminate as much of the other stuff as possible, and then you run the experiment. Right? You run the experiment, and then you look at the results, and you ask yourself, you analyze it. Did the results of that experiment confirm undermine or maybe do nothing to your hypothesis. And then depending on the analysis, you do it over again. So you've got to be able to reproduce it. Like if you did it one time and it doesn't seem to work, excuse me, if you do run the experiment, you don't quite get you run the experiment, you get a result that you kind of like. You got to run the experiment again to make sure that there wasn't a mistake. Maybe a lucky guess. There's a lot. So you keep running it over and over again, and then you test different variables. But it begins with the observation in the physical universe. You develop your theory, your hypothesis. Excuse me. Got to be careful because I know what kind of people we're talking about here. Or going to be talking about. And then you sort of just rinse and repeat. That's what I was taught science was in elementary and high school. And when I got to college, I assumed that was still what science was. And it really kind of took a long time for me to realize that a lot of what they call science is not that. It's kind of weird. People would make a claim of some kind, and I would say, and they would call it, well, this is science. This is just science, right? This is just science. I said, okay, well, show me the experiment. Wow, there's no experiment, you buffoon. Oh, gee whiz, you can't even expect an experiment in that situation. Like no, I don't want to give you any of the examples that I've had over the years about this. Try to keep it on track a little bit. And I would say, okay, so you must have there must be some sort of empirical basis for this if you're going to call it science, right? And many times the person I was talking with, they would give me a study or two studies, and I would like dig in vain and like, okay, but where's the empirical part? And I just couldn't find it. So finally, I'd push back, and they would say, well, it goes back to this paper here, and there was this one. I love this one place. I was having this argument about some natural phenomena, and I said, that's just an assumption. Really, it hasn't really been verified. And he got really, really mad at me because it was a consensus view, right? The majority believed it, so it must be true because that's the way science works. And so finally, in a great huff, he gave me a source document, and his own source, the research paper, said that the thing we were talking about was an assumption, the very thing that I said it was. And then he literally did not talk to me for 4 years. It was crazy. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. He eventually did talk to me, and said that he was a Buddhist. So I guess I had made some progress from his previous strident atheism. Anyway, the point is that for a lot of the things that are out there that are called science, they don't fit the parameters of what we learned in high school and even to some degree in college. It constitutes the scientific method. So they're all doing something else. So what is it? So I'm going to say this. Like they would say, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll call it pseudoscience, right? If it's something that they don't agree with, but it has some sort of empirical basis, and there have been studies done by it. And remember, I was talking about how you can always find an expert who has a different view. If you find an expert with a different view, and they're also using empirical data, but they don't like it, they'll say, "Oh, that's pseudoscience," right? They just brush it aside, just like that. So I'm not necessarily saying that this is very important. Okay. This is very, very important. When we go through and proceed through some of the articles and stuff that I'm going to discuss, I am not necessarily saying that there's no merit to what they're saying. I'm just challenging whether or not we should be calling it science. We maybe call it something else. Now, I'm a realist. The truth is, for one thing, I'm like a nobody, right? Nobody cares what I think. Um, my opinion, my way of life is just to go about my business, try to um, inform people the best that I can, but otherwise try to protect myself from y'all out there. I can't change it. It's just not something that I'm want to do. But I just because I say I don't think something is scientific doesn't mean that I think we should just throw it out or that it has no validity. It very well could. But is it empirical in nature? If it's not, I don't know why you're calling it science. I'm sorry. Um, did you do an experiment? Did you construct an actual experiment? No. I I'm sorry. What you did may have been good, but I'm not willing to consider it science. Quote science. Has anyone reproduced it? Like you didn't do the experiment. We already established that, but did anyone try to replicate the results of your study or whatever? No. So basically what we have here is um a complete argument from authority, from a solitary voice, one person who did a study, maybe with a team, right? Um, and no one's ever tried to replicate it. And here you go, and now it's considered canon. Um, usually the general feeling is that we feel a lot better about a truth claim if more people can replicate it, and by definition is not false just because it hasn't been replicated. And that would be stupid. But we're not going to give it the same epistemological weight. And I think that's kind of where I'm going to be going with a lot of this. Like, what is the epistemological weight that we're going to give to different claims? I would love it if it were at all possible to go wading into the realms of medicine and psychology and um theoretical physics maybe sometimes, and just say, okay, what you're doing is good, important, but it was not science, and just have everyone agree with me that um no observations were made, no experiments were done, no attempt was made to replicate it. um okay, we'll call it something else. That's clearly not going to happen. But we need to be able to weigh things, give certain amount of weight to, no one can see my hands as I gesture. um uh the closer things get to impacting our own daily lives, we have to be able to um assess the weight that we're going to give the validity of those claims. And I'm not, I've made it very clear, I think by now, that just because I don't think something is scientific doesn't mean that I think that it's false or not without merit. Because I happen to know, for example, that even if that even the method that I described, it has obvious limitations, right? Strictly speaking, if we're going to be philosophical about things, no experiment can be perfectly replicated, because that would require going back in time so that you can witness, the experiment going again, right? So we're already out of luck. Also, it concerns the empirical universe, right? So if there's anything outside of the universe, science by definition can't can't tell us anything about it. It can't detect it. It would require going outside of the system to observe something which by definition, by all understanding at this point, we there's no reason to think that we'll ever be able to do that. But that doesn't mean that my belief in God is unfounded. It just means that it's not strictly speaking, scientific. But then again, the love that I have for my wife is real, but I don't consider that to be scientific either. So does that, I mean, like, what are we even talking about here? I mean, why are some people so stupid? I mean, that's just a dumb argument. Like, just because you can't see it or taste it or touch it or replicate it, or, here's the little test tube of my love between my wife. Can we weigh that? I mean, what is wrong with you? Unfortunately, there are real people behind many of these little anecdotes. So I know some of you who are watching this are like, wow, he just went off as a rocker, but I could name names. Another thing that's very important when we talk about the limits of what I would call actual science is that you can't actually get a moral recommendation from something that is straight up empirical. So, for example, we know that water boils at a certain temperature, and of course, you got to take into account the air pressure, right? Altitude, that kind of stuff. So you got your boiling water. There it is. You can do it over and over and over again. True, you can't replicate the initial experiment, but within the arrow of time, you can continue to boil water at your temperature. Does that, now you got your boiling water, does that help you determine whether or not you should throw it in the face of your neighbor? Like, how do you test that scientifically? You got your boiling water. Now what? What should I do? G.E. Moore is famous for this statement. You cannot get an ought from an is. And I would say that if someone is bringing you a whole bunch of ises from something that they consider to be an ought, then that they're portraying as an ought, then they're probably muddle-headed propagandists, or liars maybe, or I mean, they could be just straight up wrong. But the truth is, if anything's truly empirically based, truly scientific, you can't get a moral application from it because that requires a moral agent. And so I don't know if you kind of see where this is going, but with in the context of like COVID or whatnot, and where they're telling us about R naughts and the maybe the age groups it was targeting or whatever. Even if we assumed that information was coming to us as empirically validated and repeatable data, it still would not follow that any particular proposal from that about what we ought to do doesn't follow from that, right? So like, you have to acknowledge that there are moral agents who are going to have to process that information and then apply it. But that's not science. That's something else. It doesn't mean it was unreasonable. I think a lot of it was, partially because they don't acknowledge this stuff. But it was not science. It is not science. The thing that they're talking about might be science. Their application cannot possibly be, by definition, science. And they like to dress it up that way. Oh, it's evidence-based. Well, you can't get an ought from an is. You might have evidence. We could prove that water boils at a certain temperature depending on the altitude and the air pressure. It doesn't help us determine if we should throw it on another person's face. And choose whatever analogy that you want with that. So I'm going to switch to another screen here. Here we go. And I'm going to use this essay that I read a long time ago. I see it's more than 20 years old. I'm not really sure when I read it. Now, Frank Tipler, he's an interesting guy. I don't agree with everything that Frank Tipler has to say. But I think if you look at his credentials, if you are the credential type person, you'll have to concede that his are his are pretty good. Yeah, I mean maybe a little wing nuttish. Maybe that, I mean, that could be your view, but you can't say he doesn't know his stuff. You can't say that he didn't get published in peer reviewed journals, right? That sort of thing. Um, so if you are the kind of person that believes that an argument from authority, um, or in this case, actually, the logical fallacy would be the genetic fallacy. Like, if you think that things are not reasonable or true because of the source, then you don't have to really pay attention to this. But then you're not a reasonable person either. So let's just not confuse the two things. So let's just consider the merits of this longtime scientist, what he has to say. So here's the thing about science right now. I shouldn't put it that way, because I don't claim to be a scientist. I'm not a scientist. I don't spend my life designing and implementing experiments for the most part. But I'm fairly well read, and I'm engaged in this epistemological debates in a lot of ways. So, not necessarily a hack either. Why did I even bring that up? Yeah. So, what happens is something is really only considered to be considered science, in our modern day if it's been in a journal and it has been peer reviewed, right? So what we can take from that is, if it's not in a journal, it must be false. If it was in a journal but it was not peer reviewed, it must be false, right? Conversely, if it's in a journal and it has been refereed, it must be true, right? Well, okay, you're not going to find a whole lot of people who agree to it in those terms, but that's kind of how they behave, right? And I've seen this many times, in different contexts. So let's just go through this and analyze it. So he was he he ran into trouble because he had been in many peer-reviewed journals, but as he said in his introduction here, one of his arguments was rejected, because he found that somebody didn't see those arguments in a peer-reviewed journal, a refereed journal. And he has other reasons which he discusses in this, for like being personally affected by what we might call an industry, so to speak, the science industry. Anyway, he gives us a little history here, and let's see. He's going to go over highlighting that what is peer review, how it's supposed to work, how it actually works, so on and so forth. But then he begins providing some historical context, and people might not know this. The idea that a scientific idea cannot be considered intellectually respectable until it first appeared in a peer-reviewed journal did not become widespread until after World War II. And he talks about that and he explains that, and that's about right. That's Eisenhower's military-industrial complex. It's the rise of the nuclear age, the Cold War, a lot of government investment, a lot of the journals. There were so many people submitting papers that it became kind of like important to find a way to sort through the good from the bad, but also people who were giving out government grants. I'm synthesizing what he goes on to say. People who were giving out government grants kind of needed some sort of a handle on who was producing good research versus bad. that kind of thing. So, in other words, after World War II was the rise of the peer review industrial state, we'll call it. Um, Prior to that, it worked primarily to eliminate crackpot papers. He does not. Oh, the reason why I highlighted this part, because this I think is the key thing. It's that first sentence. Today, the refereeing process works primarily to enforce orthodoxy. And there's that religious language again. He also thinks that part of the problem is that the people who are doing the reviews, they're only going to be competent enough to evaluate stuff that's already like status quo. Anything that's truly novel, anything that's truly breakthrough, he doesn't think a lot of the people who do the peer review would even be able to, themselves competent to be able to keep up. But I want to focus on this idea that it seems to work primarily to enforce orthodoxy. And so here I will give an example. Over the years, in debates about like intelligent design, some of you might know that I'm a young earth creationist. No apologies. You could try to shame me or make fun of me or whatever. But if you saw the first part of this episode, you know exactly how far that will get you. But one of the things that will be said, we'll limit it to intelligent design, is, well, there's no peer-reviewed studies or papers that show it. And then you come to find out that the peers automatically eliminate anything that has anything that could potentially threaten the materialist outlook. So it kind of like, well, there's nothing in the peer-reviewed literature. Oh, that's because people with bias won't let it into the peer-reviewed literature. Bias, nothing there. Well, no surprise then that there would not be a whole lot of intelligent design papers. I have no idea what the current state is, but you get the idea. And so this is like already the beginning of like, hopefully you can see where I'm going with how this is like a flaw. Like a lot of, how about we'll put it this way? There is an obvious potential for the zeitgeist of a philosophical mindset of so-called scientists. I don't mean to like not call them scientists in this, but like those people, if they have any kind of a bias about something, then the things that they don't like won't get in the papers, the journals. And so then if you say, well, if that was reputable, it would be in the journals, except for that doesn't account for the bias that keeps them out of the papers, right? So there's an obvious problem here where there could be loads of things that are out there that are completely legitimate. We'll even say we're definitely scientific according to my own definition, but because they didn't fit the paradigm, or it goes against vested interests, that it just wasn't out in there. And then conversely, it could very well be if the system is the way that this describes, and it is, that a lot of the things that make it into the journals are only there because they're basically confirmation bias. They're like just more of the same. And another way of putting it, like there's an Overton window for the quote scientific community. The things that fit into it, you can publish those things. Anything that challenges it, the peers won't let it in. So it's obviously absurd to say, well, that means it's not true. That would be dumb. Doesn't mean that it is true, but obviously using the whole idea of the peer review as a metric for whether or not something is true or not is absurd. So what we have here is what I call an epistemological shortcut. Now, it's not bad to have epistemological shortcuts. We all have them, right? We just don't have the the time, energy, and resources to evaluate every potential truth claim in the level of like actual scientific rigor. And when I say that, I mean like real science, you know, experimentation, etc. Um, but sometimes the problem is when we have these epistemological shortcuts is that we forget that it was a shortcut, right? And we rely on something that just does not have the strength to hold what we want it to hold. And I think that's what's going on with a lot of what passes as science today. And he's going to make the case that part of the problem, and he speaks in particular of physics here. There's just so many people who are doing all this work. It didn't used to be this way, like prior to government funding or whatnot. And so the challenge is, so what do? You just have so much content to review that it starts to get to be the case where, as an epistemological shortcut goes, even the peer review process is going to have much more limited value than it might have had even like in the 1980s. And he was already complaining about it, right? So let me go on here. Salaries began to depend on the number of papers published and on the grant support which well-received papers could garner. It's the publish or perish thing, right? It used to be the universities were places of teaching and education, and then came the government money and the grants that came with it. And now, yeah, there's a little teaching on the side, but if you want to have all the fancy buildings and stuff, you better get some reports out, papers published as reputable as possible. And he says right here, the production of scholarly articles has increased by more than a factor of 1,000 over the past 50 years. He says the average quality of the papers goes down, but he's kind of he goes easy on that. He figures I'm just representing his argument now that throughout history there's always been bad papers, but since there's thousands more papers, the odds are there's just that many more. He talks about how yeah, I'm not going to get into that. So here he goes over I think 3 different Nobel Prize winners. Maybe it was 4. I have this linked, pretty sure, in the description. If not, someone let me know because I'll make sure that it's there. And the Nobel Prize winners couldn't get their stuff through the peer process. I see we get a comment, but I see ... So I'll let him finish it. Anyway, so the Nobel Prize winners couldn't even get their stuff through peer review, or at least not initially. So this kind of speaks to Tipler's complaint that people with really, really great breakthrough ideas can't get through the people who are just defending the Overton window. Stephen Hawking, same thing. Okay. Why did I highlight this one? Bowl and thread, was it? Have you completed your thought there? Try to figure out why I highlighted this. Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I can't speak to this in the same kind of personal way that that Tipler is, but it's pretty clear to me that the publish or perish mindset is like a real phenomena, and that the system has become built to reward those who are going to produce papers more than just pursue what I might call pure research, because pure research doesn't necessarily pay. All right, so we have a comment in here. I'll take a minute here and kind of read all of them here. Peer review goes back to the Royal Society of London in the 1600s. Today, depending on the tier of the conference, much of the first round peer review happens by graduate students. That Tipler would, I don't know if he would disagree with that, but I think he'd have a problem with that. Bolin Thread says, I found that in my field, I would get my papers rejected for 2 to 4 years, and then the same paper approved in year 5 after the field caught up. So maybe a little bit sympathetic to what Tipler is complaining about here. So now we get to some recommendations here. One thing that he complains about is the increasing centralization of scientific research, and what he's really referring to here is like the funding sources, right? And that's like right here. Most American universities, even the liberal arts colleges, are desperately dependent on government grants. And this is an important thing that came up recently. A typical National Science Foundation grant has an overhead charge. And I'm just going to read what he says here because this is important, which can amount to 50% of the grant. And I believe that's standard to this day, or it was until this new Trump administration. This overhead charge goes directly to the university administration. The scientist never sees a dime of that part. So if the grant, he has to explain to us, if the grant is $1 million, the overhead is 50%. The scientist only gets $500,000 to work on that. The other $500,000 goes to the university bottom line. So a university is strongly motivated to hire only those scientists who can obtain large grants. Pushing an idea that is contrary to current opinion is not a good way to obtain large grants. For the exact same reason why Disney keeps churning out the exact same movie over and over and over and over again. That's why the universities are behaving in this way. Okay, so he gives some personal stories about it. He does take aim at the atheism. I can't really get a good read on Tipler, his religious beliefs. I don't think he's not a Christian in the way that I would. I mean, I just don't know. Yeah, but nonetheless, this speaks to my point about how, there are actually good evidences and arguments and scientific data in favor of intelligent design, and yes, even a young Earth creation. But if you've got a peer field that's completely 90% hostile, then it's really not a surprise if none of them get it in. And it has nothing to do with the merits of the studies. Anyway, I'm almost done with this. I just highlighted this one because like there will be people who are like, really, that's true. Every creationist believes that natural selection operates in nature. Yeah, that's true. A lot of evolutionists that I've debated with over the years has no clue about that. Anyway, so one of his ideas, I'm not going to really get too deep into this, is to basically decentralize things, have some state level funding for research instead of just the federal government. So he has some ideas, and this is an important point, I think, to make. Like, just because someone like myself does not find that the peer review process really has a lot of epistemological value, and I'll come back around to that. There are people who have problems with the peer review process, but actually still believe we should have some kind of peer review process, right? Now, the epistemological value. So I talked about the biases and whatnot, but here's the thing. I'm gonna get myself a little bit more rum. Which part of this peer review process sounded remotely like the scientific method? I mean, did you hear anything in there about like how the peer reviewers want to make sure that there is an actual empirical observation, or they actually constructed? We want to make sure that there's an actual experiment behind these studies, or there was any kind of replication. Is not even there. It's basically like these anonymous people receive a paper. The anonymous people, to us, I mean, my impression is that sometimes they find out, who they might be or whatnot. It's all politics, right? But we're just supposed to trust these anonymous people are gonna recognize a genuinely insightful piece of empirically demonstrable parts of the universe or whatever, and share that. And that if they omit something, it really was for the best. That's the level of, it's an epistemological shortcut, and it's just not one that I give a lot of weight to. I can appreciate if you're like a journal publisher and you've got like 1,000 studies that are being submitted to you for consideration. You got to find a system. Yeah, I mean, I get that. But me on the other side of it, like way down the pipeline, that doesn't mean that I have to consider it as canon. That doesn't mean that I'm going to say, like, as the consumer of information and knowledge and analyzing stuff, that I'm going to say, oh, well, Nature determined that this was worthy of publishing, so it must be good. It must be true, in fact. Yeah, that's not going to work. You got your problems, I got my problems. And here's what I would recommend. My own solution would be, like many other solutions, is that there have to be a lot more checks and balances. And this is the way that I solve just about all problems. More checks and balances. I don't want to sit here and try to save the peer review process. What I wanted to do was highlight in this criticism of the peer review process, there's still not really a hint that, well, hey, what we should really do is define science as that which is empirical and verifiable and repeatable, because that's where my head would have went. I think our commenter has said something that is at least compatible with what I would accept. I think I spoke to it. So let's see, what should I do next here? There are other problems. Yeah, so this has happened more than once. Now, these guys, they have their own axe to grind, and they took aim at the woke stuff. I'm just showing this as a kind of an aside. They were able to submit papers that passed peer review that were just straight up nonsense, right? And eventually, it was uncovered. But there really have been quite a few of these. A far more substantive, well, I mean, this was important, is what is called the replication crisis. And I'm almost embarrassed to be quoting from Wikipedia so much. So, right here, right? The reproducibility of empirical results is a cornerstone of the scientific method. yes. And then unfortunately, I've seen different estimates over the years. 50 to 70% of the studies that are out there cannot or have not been replicated. I don't know if I saw that in this. This is something that I've been reading about a long time. They commonly take aim at the fields of medicine and the social sciences, but this happens in the natural sciences too, physics, straight up physics, that kind of thing. Cold fusion, which I brought up in 2 episodes ago, which was really fascinating because cold fusion was the like the first time when I was in high school was the first time like I had heard about peer review. So we're going back a long time ago. Yeah, I know I'm kind of a geek that in high school I was paying attention to this stuff. But supposedly it couldn't be replicated, right? They found a way to do cold fusion supposedly, and then they couldn't be replicated. And then so good on them for trying to replicate it. But then we found out excuse me, then like since then in the last 30 or 40 years we found out as because the internet has made it more accessible to learn things, that the people who tested it were people who were hostile to the whole idea of cold fusion and saw it as a threat to their livelihoods. So that's kind of a problem too, right? The point is that actually most of the time no one tries to reproduce these studies. They just enter into canon. What tends to happen is if it's an especially interesting piece of science, it'll get in the newspapers, in the media, and then that actually is ironically the best way to lead to a refutation, because now that it's in the media, now people want to look at it. Most of the time, it's not newsworthy enough, and it just passes unnoticed. And maybe other scholars or specialists or whatever might rely on that unreplicated study, and on and on and on it merrily goes. So this might come as a surprise to you, that I wish I could find a number. I did see some numbers as I was going through this. It's a huge proportion, and even the ones that are considered good, they're considered good based on statistics, which statistics is valuable, but it's not the same as running an experiment, right? It's a method that's applied to what we're doing, and it's not the same as reproducing it. Anyway, I really wanted to find this number. I guess I don't remember. That's a specific one. Well, I don't want to get bogged down on this. Somewhere, probably in this Wikipedia article, but others as well, of prevalence. Well, here's psychology. Let me just highlight it here. They redid 100 studies in psychology, and 97 of the original had significant effects, but of those 97, only 36% of the replications yielded significant findings. And of course, what counts as significant is arbitrary. So there's that. Somewhere I also saw medicine. Okay. Here we go. So, does medicine seem like the kind of thing that is life and death to you? Just wondering. Like, this would be important, right? Right, evidence-based. We want our doctors to be using rock solid, empirically demonstrable research material when they are proposing things. Um, the source here, what is it? Well, it's something in PubMed. Of 49 medical studies from 1990 to 2003 with more than 1,000 citations, 92% found that the studied therapies were effective. Okay? So 92% of them said, yes, do these therapies. But of them, 16% were contradicted by subsequent studies. 16% had found stronger effects. Only 44% were replicated. Well, that's not great, right? So more than half could not be replicated. I didn't really dig into the details of this, but yeah, Bowl and Thread. And one of the things that I saw as a response was to the p-value was to actually reduce the p-value. And the number I saw, I don't remember where I saw it now, was drop it to 0.005, which, that would be quite the drop. But again, I would say one of the problems with these epidemiological studies, which I'm assuming that a lot of these are, is that, and this is going to be relevant here in a minute, you can't you can't actually replicate the study, right? So let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say you have a study, it's got a sample of 100 people. Bam, 100 people. It injects them all with substance A, and then it wants to see if how many of them die. So let's just say 5 of them die. Okay, substance A, 100 people. How do you replicate that? Well, going back to what I said at the very beginning, or earlier at least, strictly speaking, there is no replication of an experiment because the arrow of time only goes one way. All you can really do is try to reproduce the conditions of your experiment as closely as possible. But the problem is when you do that with people, it becomes very difficult, right? Especially if they become aware that they were in a study to begin with. But you can't you can't like take substance A out of the people, right? And bring back to life the 5 that died and then run the experiment again, right? So there's already a serious limit to just how much one of these studies can be actually considered, quote, scientific in the narrow sense that I advocate that we should understand science to be. There's already big problems. And here come the complaints. Well, it's not reasonable. Okay, well, like, fair enough. I mean, I know you can't do it. I understand it's a problem. Just don't tell me it was science. Call it something else, dude. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm not saying that your study was without any merit at all. I'm just saying as an epistemological shortcut, you're not going to be able to paper over the epistemological weight simply by calling it science and then not be able to show any kind of replication. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to trust my life to it, if at all possible, if I have the choice, right? So some of these problems really begin to compound because when you're talking about studying the effects of anything on a human population, that's really all they have is the human population. And then here comes the next excuse. Well, it wouldn't be ethical to do XYZ. But again, yes, I agree. Wouldn't be ethical. Don't reinfect them with smallpox just to prove a point. But then again, don't call it science either. It's not necessarily valid. I'm going to say it, I guess, over and over again. I'm not saying it was invalid. I'm just saying it wasn't science. You weren't able to replicate it. You can't replicate it because it would be immoral to do it. Oh, well, call it something else. And the reason why I think that's important is because in our society, people have been conditioned, probably on purpose, to hear the magic phrase, Trust the science. It's science. You can't disbelieve science. It's science. And it becomes a weapon. And I really, really hate that. Really, really hate it when things are used as weapons in that way. Like people can't like just allow their arguments to win on the merits. They have to like bring these like a baseball bat, which I promised to do when talking about peer review. I don't know if it qualified as bringing a baseball bat to it, but it was a fun language to use. So you can't reproduce a lot of these studies. They have life and death situations. I think at least we should begin to become more honest about what it actually is. In science, it ain't. What we should call it instead, I don't know. But science, it ain't. Here's what I think happens is just because a methodology is used, it's that's enough to get it to count as science. Well, we applied statistics. We did the Bayesian filter or whatever, blah blah blah. So it must be science. And I remember getting into this argument. Boy, it was a long time ago now. I don't remember who it was. But we got into it about what science was. And finally I said, well, that's theologians do that. We go through the scriptures, the Christian scriptures, and we go through and we gather up the verses that will apply, and we generate weight to them. We put them in the Excel table maybe, and we weigh them. A real life example, and I may have actually used this in that instance. Like textual criticism, right? When we go through and we evaluate whether or not we think a piece of a manuscript should be considered the most likely part of the original, is we gather up different sources of manuscripts. We trace family trees, and they run mathematical formulas on them and statistics, and according to their standards, that should be considered science. According to my standards, it's only science from the point of view of the fact that you've got data that you can replicate the data over and over again. You can analyze it over and over again. So in that sense, I guess I would say that textual criticism is even more scientific than a lot of epidemiological studies, which have no chance of being replicated, because there's no way that you can take the same 100 people and run the experiment again. You just can't do it. And I think that's really important to call out. And people will say, well, that's just not reasonable. You can't expect that. Well, I can do what I want. And you're not going to be able to hit me over the stick with it. Because the thing is that the way people are, our lives are so diverse, right? You've got people who have different living arrangements. They have different diets. They different genetics, obviously, right? Their life choices are different. So, the way that we get around this, but not without, for good reason, is like we try to have our studies, our epidemiological studies, have as many people as possible, right? The bigger the study, the more people involved, the more confidence that we can give our conclusions. And I'm totally legit. Yeah, let's do it. But is it science? I don't know. And let me give you an example of the problem. Like for the last 40 years, think about my age here. We'll say 35 years. One day salt is bad for you. Another day salt is good for you. Another day sugar is bad for you. Oh, 3 days have gone by. Sugar is now bad for you again. Oh, cholesterol, good. Cholesterol, bad. Oh, now it's the LDLs. Oh, you see where I'm going? It's like it just keeps on changing, because that's what science does. Is it? Is it really? Yeah. No. So I'm not. Hear me. I'm not saying that a study of like 100,000 people that like does this is like doesn't have merit, and that it's to be preferred over a population sample of 50. But what at what point, where did it become science? What made it scientific? Just because you applied statistics to it, you can apply statistics to a banana. It doesn't make it science. Well, comment wondering if in a field like medicine you have a suggested different approach to vetting studies as opposed to like the peer review. I suppose. No, I think what I'm really just wanting right now is humility. To recognize that these conclusions that are reached cannot be given the same weight that we would give the conclusion that water boils at a temperature at a certain atmospheric pressure, right? Because if you call it science, there's a huge number of people who are just like, bam, well, I'm going to do it. So one day they're dosing their eggs with salt, and the other day they're getting rid of all the salt in their diet completely and dying, because turns out you need salt or you're going to die. Just saying that. Hey, OJ. OJ, you still watching? OJ Wolf Smasher is a friend of the program. I've had him on a couple days ago, a couple times actually. I see that I'm running up to 8 o'clock. You're going to have to forgive me, but I'm going to go over the time. I don't have any guests today, so if people have to drop off, I have to say, OJ, do you remember when we were at Cornerstone and there was a girl who said that she was allergic to, did she say she was allergic to water, or was it she was allergic to sugar? I don't remember. Do you remember this girl? She was the same girl who like said something to you like I don't know. She said, "Well, so what about this?" And you were like, "I'm not a web page. I'm not a hyperlink. You can't just click on me to get a new topic." Yeah, okay. She said she was allergic to sugar, right? So, okay. Yeah, really. I did not know that part. Yeah, you would die without sugar. So, your body does create some. You don't want to overdo it. Anyway, I'm not saying we should just dispense with all this assistance, but I am being very careful on how we call it, because people will just simply defer to you if you say, well, this is science. And that is dangerous. That deference is dangerous. To go back to Fauci, I am the science. Oh, so you're just going to tell me what I have to do, and I'm just going to have to do it because it's science? Well, that's going to work with a lot of people, I'm afraid to say. And it's just not reasonable, especially in almost everything that Fauci ever did. It was almost all very, very fluffy science, like according to my definition of science. Like you would never be able to reproduce hardly any of it, probably none of it. Anyway, I don't want to get off on Fauci here. What I want to do is I do want to take some time here, and maybe it won't be as long as I thought. But I am going to go over my 8 o'clock normal time. It's just the way it is, and talk about how some places where this was applied during COVID that were just really, really troubling. And we need to learn from this. People, I beg you, please. Because, I don't live on an island with my own private army to protect myself from y'all. So, can we just learn? So, for example, which one should I do? Let's do the school one, because that's the one that I did take a little bit more time to study here. And we'll see where things go. So I became aware of this a long, long time ago. This is a New York Times article. I know this is not what the link is. But the New York Times article itself was firewalled, or what's the word for it? Paywalled. So I went and found it somewhere else. So basically, here's what happened, right? I'm going to summarize this story. This is New York Times, right? So some people, if it's in the New York Times or the Guardian, they believe it. It's absolutely true. Is it the New York Times saying that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction? They believe it. And only later on, when the New York Times says, well, maybe there wasn't weapons of mass destruction, that would be Judith Miller, as I recall. They all. Thank you, thank you for telling me that. I this microphone has this really nice feature here where all you have to do is tap it and it mutes. I got a little animated there, so sorry about that. Thank you for calling attention to that. As I was saying, those who are my age, you know, we've been around. There have been diseases. We've made it through. Now, I was very young when the swine flu came through in um, mid to late 1970s. And actually, I wasn't gonna bring this up, but this is actually, I think that I should. I once sat across from a public health director. I'm being taunted, I think, on the in the chat. That's okay. I can take it. I'm a man. So I was sitting across from a public health director because I had thwarted his plans. He wanted to interview me and find out what made me tick, and to try to like warm me up and sort of like facilitate I don't know, empathy maybe. He shared a story about how in the 1970s he was a young whippersnapper in the public health field, and this is absolutely true, by the way, what I'm about to share. And he recorded the conversation, and someday perhaps I will acquire that recording. It would, but I don't know if it's a public record. But I've been tempted to try to get it. Anyway, here's what he said. He said that during the swine flu epidemic, they had a vaccine, and they knew very early on that it had problems, that it was going to cause death and destruction. And he was telling this to me, right? He's trying to like win me over, kind of thing. To that win me over to him being a nice, sensible guy, I guess. And he said, and I was appalled that my peers said, you know what? We should use this as an opportunity to find out how many people will get the vaccine, the very one that he just described as known to be dangerous. How many people will take the vaccine just because the government tells them to? And that became the experiment. Now, I have never attempted to independently verify that. He's talking about back in like smoke room conversations or whatever. But there you have it. A public health official telling me face to face, no further away than I am right now from my computer monitor, that they basically decided to make the swine flu epidemic a test to see how compliant the American people would be when taking a vaccine that was already known by many people to be dangerous. So yeah, if I'm a little bit skeptical or, cynical, there are reasons. I'm not saying they're scientific, but I'm also not saying that they're false for that reason. Anyway, so that little anecdote aside, um, so this story begins in the mid 2000s. George Bush read a book about the Spanish flu and became concerned about what would happen if there was a pandemic. Would the federal government have a response? Now, there are problems. There are lots of people who go back to the Spanish flu, and Spanish flu was like like a touchstone for understanding pandemics. But there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, the I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but the Spanish flu happened um, before really like germ theory was really truly fully established. Like by 1905, it had come back around, and people were really, you know, they were it was becoming normal. But more importantly, a lot of people who died from the Spanish flu didn't die from the flu, but because of the bacterial pneumonia that came as a consequence to it. Okay, so, well, we didn't have penicillin yet, friends. Penicillin wasn't discovered until, I think there were some early discoveries in the 1920s, but not really. Well, when did what's his face discover it and get the Nobel Prize for it? Like 1935 or something. Um, so our ability to treat bacterial pneumonia was you know limited, and we don't have that limitation anymore. So to keep comparing things over and over and over again to the Spanish flu is, I'm sorry, just a little ridiculous. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be concerned about these things, but like a naturally created pathogen, we'll say, it has certain known quantities about it. And if it's Ebola, we know, for example, that it's actually so ruthless that it tends to burn itself out fast, because it kills all of its hosts so fast. But I guess I'm gonna get myself into the weeds here. But my point is that you can't really it's really not wise to try to create a pandemic response plan based on the Spanish flu, as if there were not 60 to 70 years of advances in modern medicine to take into account. Right? We've got ways of dealing with these things. Plus, we have a much greater handle on the importance of good nutrition and healthy diet and these kinds of things. Um, Thank you, Jamie. 1928 found, 1940s discovered, and it was Fleming, of course. Yes, that's almost embarrassing that I couldn't remember his name. Um, but anyway, so George Bush was worried about the Spanish flu. He read a book about the Spanish influenza, a book that I actually have on my shelf. He wanted to develop a response, which is fine. I mean, I guess that's good. Um, but the one of the things that unfolded in this is that they tapped into this guy here. I want to maybe make sure I get the names. Here's the book. Yep, it's a good book. Um, yeah, I don't want to minimize these concerns, but anyway, I think I've already. The point is that I'm just gonna skip real quick. So one of the guys who was called to develop this plan got his idea for school closings from his, I think she was 14. She was 14 years old. She built a model of social networks of her school, and her father, who happened to be part of a federal agency, saw it and was like part of this conversation and said, well, gee whiz, if only we shut down all the schools, we might be able to stop a pandemic before it starts when we don't have a vaccine. Okay. Now, here, this is a New York Times article, right? The outcome of their research was startling. What was their research? Their research was a computer model. Okay. Now, I don't care how good of a model that you make, it's not the same as real life people. And it's still not the kind of, well, I guess you could say you can run a model through over and over and over again. I mean, so there's that. A simulation can be run over and over again. So, in that sense, it's reproducible. But people are people, and it's just a different kind of thing. Is this science? Yeah, I don't think so. Is it methodological? Methodological? Yeah, okay. Now, am I saying that it is bad or wrong? No, I'm not. I hope I made that clear. And the fact that, oh, I see already that Bull is taking aim. Yeah, I don't even reject the idea because she was 14. That would be the genetic fallacy again, right? Ironically, some of the people who who are critical of this point out that Glass, the dad, wasn't even a doctor. No, I don't think that's why that's like back to trying to say, well, if they got the right credentials, it must be true or false. I don't do that. The point is, though, in my mind, is that you have this thing, this basically a hypothesis that if you shut down the schools, now I found out today that I have to be very clear about this. You have to shut down all the schools, right? So obviously they've been shut down schools or movie theaters or hospitals or whatever, you know, probably from time immemorial. Like it's probably always happened as a response to pandemics, um, probably. But all the schools, put everyone in their homes, lock them all up. Then we will be able to stop the pandemic. And when was this tested empirically exactly? I wonder. Well, this article talks about it 2009. In 2009, H1N1A, I believe it was, um, the CDC did recommend in certain circumstances that schools do it, but the analysis was post hoc, right? They didn't need there even has not even been a time or a place that I'm aware of where the public health people said, you know what, the next time there's a disease, we have our experimental apparatus ready to go. We're gonna run the experiment, by golly. In this place, say the island of Madagascar, that's our control. We're just gonna let it go. We're gonna let it be. And in Taiwan, we're gonna implement this policy full forward. The Taiwanese being very, very compliant people, wearing masks long before COVID, wearing masks even when they're having intercourse with their wives. These are the people. I'm sorry, that was for South Korea, not Taiwan. But Taiwan is an island. I guess South Korea could be considered an island given that it's what its neighbor is. At any rate, two islands, totally self-contained. We're gonna run the experiment. No, nothing like that. Nothing. So basically, they said, as part of this plan, going back to 2005, 2006, someone says, you know what, we ran a computer model that says we can reduce the spread of a pandemic by doing XYZ. And do we have to do an actual experimental study? Empirical is being the word here. An empirical study? A real world running of the experiment? Nope. Like it doesn't even cross their mind. And I'm gonna return to this here in a minute because it's important. H1N1, maybe AIDS was a variant. I have a real problem with that because when this was like portrayed, we've got to shut down the schools. Trust the science. I am the science. This is the science, a computer model. There you go. There's your science. Now, in this particular situation, I'm also annoyed greatly because there are other considerations besides the spread of the pandemic that were not anywhere close to being on their minds or in their scope of thought whatsoever. So, like, for example, what happens to a person? What happens to a 14-year-old person, for example, if you lock them in their room for 2 years or lock them in their house? You deny them access to friends. You tell them they can't compete in sports. All the things that they had done before, they can't do. They've got to wear a mask when they go out. They're going to have to get vaccines as soon as possible. They don't know. They can't really understand any of it, right? What happens to that person? What happens to a society filled with those persons? What is the psychological impact on the psyche of a whole generation when you decide to lock them in their effing houses? Surely the people who wrote the study thought about that, right? Well, I have it ready here. Let's just see. Here's the people. Robert Glass, that's the guy. Laura Glass is the daughter. Skimming through here. Methods, all, computer model, statistics, stylized, small U.S. town, 10,000 people, locking them in their houses. Look at results. We showed that spread of influenza was lower. Okay. Going on forth and so on and so forth. Base social infective strains or whatever. Well, the discussion. Surely the discussion will have something about the implications on the human soul or the infringement of personal liberties at the scale of 300 million people. Surely the discussion will, damn it. Nope. Gosh, they didn't even think about that. Wow. That's interesting. But it's science, man. It's science. So let me ask you a question. What is the value of the lives of 100 people who die from COVID compared to the lives of 100 people who shoot themselves in the head out of despair because of COVID measures? Like, which one, like cost benefit ratio, which lives were more important? Just kind of wondering. Like, surely our scientists have asked that question. Surely they're curious about that. I don't want to pick on poor Robert Glass here, because they're all like this. All these, I don't even want to limit it to it is the public health people, of course, but it's like all of them, right? They put out these things, they put out these studies, they do their thing, and it's very narrowly sliced, and they say, well, the science says, but what did I say? You can't get an ought from an is, like, not if it's real science. And when you get to the ought, if the ought is, well, I'm going to lock people indefinitely into their homes, and we'll decide when or if they're going to be allowed out. You would think, you would expect, you would hope that these people would have a certain presence of mind to be able to think ahead to, well, okay, yeah, we saved a life here on the one hand, but maybe we wrecked 20 lives over here. Well, here come the excuses. Well, I'm just a public health official. It's not my job to know that. Well, then it's not your freaking job. It's just not your job to decide for the rest of us what we should do. We should make that decision. That should be on us, okay? We will decide whether or not these mitigation measures um, are worth giving up our livelihoods, um, giving up our sources of income. And by the way, in case anyone's wondering, I am now describing myself. Okay. These decisions were made for me, and I am not happy, and I will never, ever, let me think. Will there ever no, never forgive them. Never. And they will never, well, okay, I should maybe. Okay, all right. So I know there's like, I have some Christian viewers. I'm like, that's not very spiritually healthy. Okay. Individually speaking, I might forgive, the local public health director, or, any random public health person who would be watching this. But like as a collective, these people are just following orders. And I don't really like people who just follow orders like mindlessly, especially if it's your job to like make sure that you have mastery of the facts. And the problem with this kind of analysis is that like you have to have a certain level of intellectual curiosity to know that if you do this measure, there's going to be knock-on effects that are bad. And you should have the integrity and the forethought before you do them to be ready to look for them. And right now, the only metric that I'm really aware of that might cover something like this is like excess deaths. But I don't know about the viewers, but I don't know anyone personally who committed suicide because of the COVID measures. But there are people around that I'm aware of who committed suicide, and it's a very complicated kind of thing. Some of them were young, actually, very young. And I just know that when that happened, my local public health director or the public health director in that area had no knowledge that that person committed suicide, had no interest in knowing whether or not it had anything to do with the 2 years of absolute lockdown, had no thought that maybe they should even try to measure that. Like, that didn't even cross their minds. In their mind, conceivably, we save lives in the here and now, and what happens in the future, not my problem. I see some comments coming here. I'll wait till you're done before you kind of get to them. Although you might be done, but I'm going to keep going. I will come back to it though. I appreciate the comments as always. So this is my problem with a lot of these these measures. Like to me, if you're going to lock down a whole society, it isn't enough to only measure. Let me rephrase it. If it's my job to decide whether or not society should be locked down, whether it's a politician, a public health director, or whatever, then you bought the whole thing, right? You own it. It's you, especially if you force it on the population. You are responsible for the good effects and the bad effects. You don't just get to walk away from the bad effects like they never happened. And this is the problem. They're not even aware of the bad effects. A lot of them, like they like totally wash their hands of it. Well, we meant well, right? And then they said, well, it was evidence based. No, it was a computer model, dude. Okay, so let me see the comment over here. These decisions were really shaped by people steeped in the field of public health, which is interdisciplinary. They draw from scientific studies. I wonder if they're the science the way I've been defining it, but also judgment, ethics, politics, and values. And that is the part that seems to be downplayed or not discussed publicly as much. Well, yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that. And I think the best public health people are aware of the ethics stuff. or some of the other elements of it. And the best of them know, I think, that when they are trying to impose their policy suggestions on the people, that they had better get it right. But I think I wonder, like I worry, or I feel pretty confident actually, that the scope of their investigations in terms of what they would consider to be right is pretty narrow. So, like I mentioned, the excess death things right now. Like I literally had on more than one occasion encounters, actual interactions with people where people who were smart, some of them in the professional careers, and not all of them. I don't really, less than the number of fingers that I have, but I had these conversations. So, have you thought about what will be the consequences of this on people in general? Like, what will happen? And the answer literally was, well, in a year or two, we'll look at the excess deaths. I find that to be grossly irresponsible. So, like, you're going to do something which you think might save some people now, but kill other people later, and you're just gonna do it because a couple years from now, someone might get around to studying to see if that really happened. Because it's not brain surgery to figure out that some people are going to be really hard hit by these policies. Yeah, some people will stand up to it okay, but others who are more vulnerable, they're not gonna, and there's no accountability for them. Like they don't feel like they're on the hook for, they want to take credit for the lives they think that's saved, but they don't want to take any blame at all for the ones that are lost. In fact, they will never even do any studies at all to find out how many died because of their policies. It'll never happen. If it's happened, um, I'd like to be corrected. I would love to be proved corrected on this, but I doubt it very much. So yeah, computer models basically led to the lockdown of schools. I don't approve. And I don't think that's science. I think they're computer models and they're probably very good for what they are, but just don't call them science. Be honest about it, folks. I know that I'm well over my time here, but I want to talk about one other thing. So I found this article. Let me get it. Here we go. I think this is the reason why I'm going to end on this, because I think that it's a good illustration of what happens when, like, of all these things, like the federal government involved in financing research, all these different bureaucracies, well-meaning people who just give deference to experts. Um, uh, anyway, so I don't know if I have a link to this article. Maybe you can find it very easily from looking at this. This is actually a very recent article, and what's interesting is, like, I remember these conversations, but I did not. Maybe it was just because of my rural area. I did not like know what effect this is, but I remember my local school talking about trying to find filters, and I have a feeling like this was part of it. So apparently, and I don't know if this happened, but apparently, that's right, Bowl and Thread. We need a study on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on suicidal attempts and death rates. Systematic review. Let's see if we ever see it. Apparently, one of the reasons why they went along with closing the schools was by saying that, well, there's not enough ventilation in the schools. That is a study. Can you give me a link? Where'd you send it? Facebook? All right, I'll look above the title. So maybe if I click that, I'll get it. I don't want to click on it now because I'm viewing this through my stream link. So maybe it'll break it. So I'll be interested in looking at that. So anyway, to go through this article. So apparently ventilation was one of the reasons why people went along with this, because on its face, you could say, well, a bacteria is gonna, or a pathogen is gonna spread better in an area without ventilation. So they kind of go through all of this thing here, and like this guy in this book, which I own, Abundance of Caution. But in New York City, 96% of its classrooms passed the ventilation. Only 200 did not. So anyway, this guy wants to figure out where this came from. That's really the kind of the thing. So he says he contacted the National Council on School Facilities, an organization that deals in all matters related to school buildings. He sent an email asking for data on the schools without windows, because it was one of the reasons they were asking for $10 billion for schools, right? Remember this, okay? So they're trying to promote to get $10 billion to improve the ventilation in schools, when, as far as this guy could tell, in New York City at least, almost all the schools had proper ventilation. So, what the heck, right? So he wants to find out, how this happened. So he tracks down the 46-page document written by the scholars at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, Johns Hopkins University, an elite institution. Ironically, Professor Ioannidis is from Johns Hopkins, and because he did not agree with a lot of the countermeasures, he was treated like a crackpot, which is the craziest thing. Anyway, I was there. So anyway, to produce the report and its recommendations, 32 experts in air quality engineering and education policy were interviewed, and the relevant peer-reviewed literature and engineering best practices were examined. So he was really happy. Finally, he's going to find out about this. But he scanned the document, but then no matter how closely he read it, he cannot find any additional information about ventilation except for one sentence, which is, windows cannot be opened in many schools. But that's irrelevant because a lot of schools have ventilation systems that are closed by like part of the windows are intentionally not allowed to be open. It's all in-house, right? So anyway, so this major report here, a GAO report, gold standard, right? He contacted them saying, hey, what about these inoperable windows? And they're like, yeah, no, there's just that one sentence. So the Johns Hopkins report made a claim, but it cited the GAO report, which doesn't really talk about it at all. Oh, yeah, it's the Johns Hopkins report. They had the one sentence. The GAO report that it was cited didn't say anything about it. Okay. So then he responds to, reacts or contacts the Hopkins report. I know this is all convoluted, right? And they make a great argument for ventilation, but nothing about the windows, right? So how do they know how many schools were involved? They're asking for $10 billion, right? This school maintenance place. I did not independently study this guy's sources, so that's a caveat here, I guess. They recommended the use of HEPA filters, but they did see here, showing reductions of virus in the air from HEPA filters is different from knowing how much reduction, if any, in the transmission of the actual disease they would have in the classroom. The only real world data was from this one paper. So anyway, I'm going to just kind of skip through here. You're getting the idea here. There's not a lot of basis for this. And so finally, like, there's no basis. There's like one sentence. So based on one sentence in one report, which cited another report, which cited another report, none of which actually talked about the thing that they were talking about, they're like asking for $10 billion. And I believe my school district got money for air filtration. And however, I did not like track this down, but I know in my own local area, like some of this happened. That's how it happened. Here it is. These unsupported claims. Oh, here you go. This paragraph. Multiple experiments have even shown that a large portion of peer reviewers did not catch purposely inserted overt falsities in scholarship. Oh yeah, we've covered that. The Hopkins report epitomizes a system of how credentialed experts can make claims without evidence but not be called out on them. These unsupported claims have made it in scholarly reports and in papers published in scientific journals, forming the foundation of truth, which, at least in part, policies on MPIs for schools seem to be suggested, required, and implemented. Right? So real world effect. So anyway, it's I'm really kind of going fast here because I'm well over my time and I didn't want to be, but the reason why I wanted to use this example is because there's a part of us that wants to like give them all the benefit of the doubt. They were just doing their best, and it isn't just the way that the COVID is managed. Like your life and death depends on the different treatment options that doctors are considering, and don't you really want your doctor to be proposing a procedure that is actually grounded on empirical and verifiable and repeatable data? I mean, don't you? Right? It happens in the medical field and nutrition. Obviously, it happens in disease management. It really happens all over the place. But then a lot of times when you search it, you find out that it goes down to like one sentence in one paper, which quotes another paper which doesn't talk about it. And you're like, well, so how did this happen? How did this happen? How did this pass into the canon of science as an irrefutable truth? Like Fauci can say, this is science, do it. How? Well, I have a theory, and I think it has a lot to do, if I may propose. It was answered way up here. Here we go. $10 billion. I betcha if we really want to find out about this particular instance and like how that's came to be, somewhere along the lines, whoever was the recipient of this $10 billion, that's your answer. So anyway, you'd hope for more. You'd hope for more science before $10 billion is spent, and schools all around the country are required to upgrade their ventilation system at the force of law. But no, probably just some special interest. And this is the system that we have and that we're going to continue to have unless people put their foot down and say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. If you want to tell us it's something that is scientific, then by golly, you better be ready to produce the receipts. And you should never, ever, ever say, well, believe me, because I represent the science. Like that person, any person who says that in any context should be fired just like that. Be gone. That should be the end of that person's career in anything related to these things. Because one of the problems with what I'm describing is like we're not talking about personal preferences for a lot of these things, right? Like if you want to go out and buy, I don't know, put yourself on some cholesterol drug because, some big pharma company thinks you should do it and that's good enough for you because the big pharma company says so. more power to it. But if the federal government comes along and says, you're taking this pill or I'm going to shoot you, you know what? You better have some really damn good evidence, like absolute, like irrefutable, whatever. But you still, like I said, you can't get it off from an is. So there's still a problem there, right? So anyway, when you bring the federal government into it, when you bring the government into these things, and you bring into an infringement on people's abilities to make their own decisions, your actual evidence, if you call it scientific, had better be actually scientific, and you had better be able to replicate it as many times as we ask for, based on, especially in proportion to how intrusive it is. Okay. See, we had another comment there. I kind of forget what I was saying, but it still looks funny. As one who has made many proposals to my spouse for absolutely necessary electronics, I am sympathetic to their approach. I wonder if this is the air filtration people, right? Anyway, sorry I missed that. Okay, so I'm gonna do the conclusion here. I like to thank people for watching this. If you did, I really appreciate it. You could have spent your time any number of ways that you want, but you spent it with me, and that means a lot. So let me just go to this. So I haven't given a whole lot of solutions, and a lot of times people say, "Well, what's your solution?" If you don't have a solution, you shouldn't even be talking. Well, I have offered some hints to a solution. I mean, like, your proposal should actually be based on science. That would be the one thing. Another would be making clear distinctions between the ought from the is, right? You should be able to tell the difference between the ought and the is. Just because you have boiling hot water doesn't mean you can throw it on your fellow man. In fact, I think it's worth mentioning the story about the computer model. I think that you don't need a computer model to understand that if you lock people into their homes, you're going to cut down on the transmission of a virus. I mean, it's just at this point logic, right? If, like, let's say we go further and we lock 6 billion people into their own individual padded rooms, where they can't interact with each other, and they're all hermetically sealed, you will prevent the transmission of diseases. But it doesn't follow that you should do that just because that would do it. You know what I'm saying? Right? So just because you have an ought doesn't mean you should do the ought. And another solution that I think that we should warm up to a little bit more is the role of the politician in this, in the sense that politicians there's a lot of people who chafe, a lot of the technocrats chafe that the politicians don't take their advice more in stride. For example, they were very, very upset that Donald Trump didn't rush to implement all these draconian measures or whatever. Well, because, I mean, love him or hate him, Trump knew that there would be serious economic and probably even like all the way down the chain. He knew that those things were going to hurt people in other ways. And the politician in the most ideal universe, the best possible universe, maybe, like, that's the person who's supposed to be able to represent all of the values. And he, unlike the public health director or the dietitian who running studies on vitamin D in rats, that person, the politician, actually answers and accountable to the people. And since it's the people who got to pay the price, then the one who makes the decisions ought to be the person who answers directly to the people. And but I'll give you a major caveat to that, and I think that we need better systems for holding a politician to account. I think that if they invoke an emergency power, then there should be strict time constraints on that emergency power. And I think that after a certain amount of time after that, say within 6 months, it should be snap elections should be required, so that the people can act in real time and speak in real time as to whether or not they approve of the measures that are taken. Because I am sympathetic to the plight of the politicians who have to make these hard calls, to school administrators, um, who have to make these decisions based on the information that they have. They do need to be responsive, but if you're going to impose draconian emergency measures on people, then there should also be a way for the people to more immediately find a redress for their grievances. And an election 4 years hence, that's too long. That's too far. Anyway, so I hope you get I hope there's so much that I wanted to say, and I'm sure that I did some things an injustice, where if I had 3 hours just to spend on that one sentence, I could do it justice. But I'm going to wrap it up. I'm 46 minutes over my own self-appointed time, and by golly, even I'm tired of me talking. So thanks for watching. If you watched it this far, really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Tell all of your friends. Find me on Patreon. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks again.